Hello everyone. In this lecture I am gonna explain line by line the famous essay, of Death, written by Francis Bacon, but if you are new to my channel then please like the video and subscribe the channel. Without wasting the time, let's start it. Men fear death, it is the starting line of this essay. Bacon begins by noting a universal truth that all humans experience a natural fear of death. This fear is rooted in all human beings that we are afraid of death, and then says, as children fear to go in the dark. Now he compares this human fear of death to how children are afraid of the dark. Actually, children fear the unknown, and similarly, death is an unknown for adults and it creates an anxiety and fear for them. The darkness symbolizes what is hidden or incomprehensible, just as death is beyond human understanding. And as that natural fear in children is increased with tales, it means that children's fear of the dark is often increased by the stories they are told about ghost stories, warnings, or things that heighten their imaginations. Simply, you can say that children's fear is increased due to the adults because they tell horror stories and give them warnings. And then says, so is the other. In this line he extends this idea to death, suggesting that our fear of death is similarly increased by the stories and beliefs surrounding it. Basically, these tales could include religious doctrines, cultural superstitions, or societal fears of the afterlife, all of which amplify the fear of death in people's minds. Simply, here he gives indication to the fear of death. And then says, certainly, the contemplation of death. Here, he says that thinking about death is serious and profound, and in many cases, people do reflect on it deeply. Contemplation means thinking. As the wages of sin, and passage to another world. It means that death is often understood through a religious lens, especially in Christianity, where it is seen as the consequence of sin and as a transition to the afterlife. Simply, you can say that sometimes death is considered the result of sin. And then says, is holy and religious. By this line he suggests that when death is considered through these religious or moral frameworks, it holds sacred meaning. This view encourages a deeper, more meaningful reflection on death than merely fearing it. But the fear of it, in this line he shifts to discuss the fear of death as a natural response that is not shaped by religious or moral thought, but simply by human nature. It means that he says that fear of death is not something unnatural but it is natural response to it. As a tribute due unto nature, is weak, it means that this fear is a part of human nature. It's a response to the instinct for self-preservation. It's a tribute or respect for the natural instinct to avoid harm or death, but it's not a deeply rational or meaningful fear. Here, tribute means respect. Simply, he implies that the fear of death is weak and it diminishes when we understand that it is the conclusion of life. And the fear is something our instinctive phenomenon, or you can say we give respect to it. Yet in religious meditations, there is sometimes mixture of vanity, and of superstition. Yet in religious meditations. In this line Bacon acknowledges that when people think about death through religious beliefs, there is often more at play than just spirituality. Religious thought about death is a significant part of many people's lives. And then says, there is sometimes mixture of vanity, and of superstition. Here he critiques religious meditations, pointing out that they sometimes mix in self-centered concerns and irrational beliefs. These elements detract from a pure, rational contemplation of death and lead to misunderstandings about its nature. Simply, you can say some people look at death through their religious perspective and/or self-centered concerns, and because of them the true nature of death is misunderstood. You shall read, in some of the friar's books of mortification. Now Bacon refers to religious texts, especially those of monks or friars, that offer advice on mortification, which means the practice of self-denial. These books recommend reflecting on pain of death. That a man should think with himself, what the pain is, if he have but his fingers' end pressed, or tortured. It means that these books suggest that a person should start by imagining small, manageable pains, like pressing on the tip of a finger, in order to build up a mental understanding of pain. And thereby imagine, what the pains of death are, when the whole body is corrupted, and dissolved. It means that this is an attempt to make the fear of death more tangible by imagining the worst possible suffering, the decomposition of the body and the pain associated with it. The idea is to prepare for the idea of death as an immense physical process. Simply, the books of friars try to show us that how painful would be the encountering of death, so they try to afraid us more by this analogy to press the finger and feel the pain. And then we will be able to imagine the pain of death. When many times death passeth, with less pain than the torture of a limb, in this line Bacon against the religious or exaggerated ideas of death by suggesting that in reality, death often comes with much less pain than what people imagine. He implies that the pain associated with dying is often less severe than the pain one might feel from an injury or torture to the limbs. For the most vital parts, are not the quickest of sense. He explains that death usually involves the failure of vital organs, such as the heart, lungs, and brain, which are not as sensitive to pain as limbs or external parts of the body. So, the actual experience of death is often less painful than the imagined, torturous scenarios. Simply, it means Bacon says that death comes to a human being first to the heart and brain, which are not sensitive to pain. So he says that death is not as painful as the people imagine it. And by him that spake only as a philosopher, and natural man. In this line he introduces the view of a philosopher who speaks from a purely rational perspective, without any religious or emotional bias. The philosopher focuses on death from a natural, non-superstitious standpoint. It was well said, Pompa mortis magis terret, quam mors ipsa. You should not be confused because here Bacon quotes the Latin phrase meaning, the pomp of death terrifies more than death itself. He is emphasizing that the external ceremonies around death, like funerals, mourning, and other rituals, are what make death seem so frightening. These cultural practices create a dramatic and terrifying image of death, which is not necessarily reflected in the death process itself. Groans, and convulsions, and a discolored face. Now he describes the outward signs of death, which include physical symptoms like groans, convulsions, and changes in the body's color. These physical manifestations of death often make it seem more terrifying than it may actually be. And friends weeping, and blacks, and obsequies. He also points to the social rituals, the weeping of friends and family, the wearing of black clothes, and the funeral ceremonies. These emotional and cultural rituals add to the drama of death, making it seem much more terrifying than the actual experience of dying. And the like, show death terrible. All these external factors, the sounds, the visuals, and the mourning rituals, contribute to creating a terrifying image of death. Bacon suggests that it is these external elements that cause more fear than the actual event of dying. It is worthy the observing. Now he is calling attention to an important observation here, something that deserves careful consideration. That there is no passion in the mind of man, so weak, but it mates, and masters, the fear of death. He argues that any human emotion, no matter how small or seemingly weak, has the potential to overcome the fear of death. Even emotions like love, hope, or curiosity can overpower the fear of death when a person is emotionally strong or mentally prepared. And therefore, death is no such terrible enemy. Bacon concludes that death, in the grand scheme of things, is not as terrifying as it is often made out to be. It is not an unbeatable foe. When a man hath so many attendants about him, that can win the combat of him, he explains that people have many attendants, emotions like courage, reason, and faith, that can help them face death bravely. These attendants can help a person conquer their fear of death and face it with strength and dignity. Revenge triumphs over death. He starts by noting that revenge often seems to overcome the fear of death. A desire for vengeance can push people to take risks or even sacrifice their lives. Revenge can be so powerful that it overpowers the natural instinct to preserve life. Love slights it. In contrast, love often minimizes or disregards death. People motivated by love might face danger or death without fear, driven by their devotion to another person or cause. Love, in this sense, diminishes the importance of death because the loved one's welfare becomes more important. Honor aspireth to it. Honor is portrayed as something that reaches for or even seeks death. People motivated by honor may view death as a noble pursuit or a path to greater esteem, particularly in situations where heroism is expected. Grief fleeth to it. Bacon points out that grief is drawn to death as well. Deep sorrow or mourning can lead individuals to yearn for death as an escape from their pain, especially after the loss of a loved one. It portrays death as a form of release from suffering. Fear preoccupateth it. Fear, on the other hand, prepares for death, often with anxiety. People might become obsessed with the idea of death, focusing on it to such an extent that it influences their actions and decisions, making them overly cautious or avoidant. Nay, we read, after Otho the emperor had slain himself. In this line he refers to a historical event where Emperor Otho of Rome took his own life. His death was a significant moment, and it sets the stage for the following point about the emotional responses it triggered. Pity, which is the tenderest of affections, provoked many to die, out of mere compassion to their sovereign. It means that pity is the strongest and most tender of emotions which others to follow Otho's example and commit suicide out of compassion for their ruler. This highlights the intense bond between leaders and their followers. Followers were so moved by pity for their emperor that they chose death to show solidarity. And as the truest sort of followers, now he emphasizes that this kind of death is the ultimate expression of loyalty. These people viewed following their emperor into death as the most sincere form of honor. Nay, Seneca adds niceness and satiety. Now in this line talks about Seneca, a Stoic philosopher, who suggests that niceness and saturation also contribute to the desire for death. When a person becomes weary of life, they may long for death as a release, not out of tragedy or courage, but out of a boredom with existence. Cogita quamdiu idem feceris, he quotes Seneca's thought, think about how long you've been doing the same thing over and over. This reflects the idea that life can become tedious, and the repetitive nature of existence may lead someone to desire death simply as a way to escape the monotony of their route. Mori vel, non tantum fortis aut miser, sed etiam fastidiosus potest. Seneca goes on to say that the desire to die can arise not only in the brave or miserable, but also in those who are tired. In other words, sometimes death is desired not out of a noble cause or suffering, but simply from an exhaustion with life's repetitions and the futility of daily existence. A man would die, though he were neither valiant, nor miserable. In this line Bacon reinforces the idea that a person might seek death not out of courage or misery, but simply because of a sense of exhaustion. This suggests that death might seem appealing to someone who is not in extreme emotional states but is simply weary of life itself. Only upon a weariness to do the same thing so oft, over and over, the main cause of this weariness is the repetition of life, doing the same things constantly, without novelty or purpose, can lead someone to desire death as an escape from this unending cycle. It is no less worthy to observe how little alteration in good spirits the approaches of death make. Here Bacon shifts focus to how people with good spirits, those who are cheerful, content, or positive, respond to death. Even as death approaches, they may not exhibit the dramatic fear or anxiety that others might. It suggests that death doesn't always change the character of someone who is at peace with life. For they appear to be the same men, till the last instant. It means that those with strong character remain unchanged in their behavior right up until the moment of death. Death doesn't fundamentally alter who they are, and they continue to present themselves as they always have, demonstrating consistency in the face of death. Augustus Caesar died in a compliment. In this line Bacon gives reference to the death of Emperor Augustus, who, just before his death, reportedly died while giving a polite compliment. This is a remarkable image of dignity in the face of death, showing how even the great emperor remained courteous to the end. Livia, conjugiae nostrae memor, by vidi vale, Augustus's last words, which means, Livia, remembering our marriage, live and farewell. Actually, these words were directed to his wife. This final sentiment of love and respect reflects how Augustus's personality and relationships remained at the forefront of his mind in his final moments, reinforcing the humanity that endures in the face of mortality. Tiberius in dissimulation. Now Bacon moves on to Emperor Tiberius, who died while maintaining his habit of dissimulation. You should keep in the meaning of dissimulation is pretending emotions and actions. Tiberius was known for his secretive and deceptive nature, and he continued this even as death approached. As Tacitus saith of him, Jam Tiberium vires e corpus, non dissimulatio, deseribant. Bacon quotes Tacitus, who notes that Tiberius's physical strength and body were failing him, but his ability to deceive was still present until the end. This shows how deeply ingrained these traits were in Tiberius's character, even in his last moments. Vespasian in a jest, sitting upon the stool. It means that when Emperor Vespasian died, he reportedly made a joke while sitting on the toilet. He said, "I think I'm becoming a god," reflecting his humor and detached attitude toward death. This moment captures his personality as someone who could face death with wit and lightheartedness. Ut puto deus fio, the phrase which means, "I think I'm becoming a god," it suggests that even in the face of death, Vespasian still carried his sense of power and divinity, which was central to his identity as emperor. Galba with a sentence. This line refers to Emperor Galba, when facing death, delivered a final sentence, likely referring to his last words. This highlights his role as a ruler, even at the end, where he maintained a sense of authority. Feri, six re sit populi Romani, holding forth his neck. These are his final words, which mean, strike, if it is for the good of the Roman people, and he presented his neck to his assassins, suggesting resignation and a sense of duty to Rome, even in the face of death. Septimius Severus in dispatch. This line gives reference to Emperor Septimius Severus died while giving orders and taking care of his affairs, showing how even in his final moments, he remained focused on leadership and governance. Adest si quid mihi restat agendum. These are his last words, which mean, be present if there's anything left for me to do, reflect his sense of responsibility in his commitment to his duties, even as death approached. And the like. This phrase refers to similar actions or ideas discussed earlier in the passage, where people, motivated by various emotions like revenge, love, or fear, behave in ways that show different responses to death. Now, Bacon turns his attention to the Stoics, a philosophical school known for its teachings about virtue, self-control, and the acceptance of death. Certainly the Stoics bestowed too much cost upon death. Here he suggests that the Stoics paid too much attention to preparing for death, possibly in an exaggerated manner. Simply, they placed great emphasis on contemplating and preparing for death, which, according to Bacon, may have made death seem more serious or threatening than it really is. And by their great preparations, made it appear more fearful. It means that their excessive preparations, such as intense meditation and Stoic discipline, might have enhanced the fear and mystery surrounding death. Instead of accepting death as a natural part of life, the Stoics' approach may have magnified the anxiety around it, making death seem more terrifying than it would otherwise be. Better saith he. Now Bacon introduces a wise saying, likely from a Stoic or ancient philosopher, in order to challenge the Stoic emphasis on death. This statement is presented as a better alternative to the excessive preparation for death. Ca finem vitae extremum inter munera ponit naturi. This quote can be translated like this: he who places the end of life as the last of nature's gifts. This suggests that death should be regarded as a natural part of the cycle of life, not an event to be feared or over-prepared for. Just as birth is a natural part of life, so too is death, and it should not be treated with undue reverence or anxiety. It is as natural to die as to be born. Bacon emphasizes that death, like birth, is a fundamental part of life. Death is just as much a part of nature as the beginning of life, and both should be seen as natural occurrences. There's no need to fear death any more than one fears birth. And to a little infant, perhaps, the one is as painful as the other. He goes on to say that for an infant, death might be as painful or as mysterious as birth. This suggests that, for a newborn could be just as overwhelming as the transition out of life. Thus, both are experiences outside the control of the individual and should be viewed as equally natural. He that dies in an earnest pursuit. Now he presents a different perspective on death. This could refer to someone who is so absorbed in a noble cause, such as a mission, a goal, or a life of virtue, that death doesn't seem like an end, but rather a natural consequence of their effort. Is like one that is wounded in hot blood, who, for the time, scarce feels the hurt. In this line he compares this person to someone who is wounded in the heat of action. Just as a person might not feel the pain of a wound in the heat of battle, a person focused on their purpose might not feel the pain of death because they are too engaged in their cause. The person is so driven by their purpose that death doesn't feel like an obstacle, and therefore a mind fixed, and bent upon somewhat that is good. In this line he argues that when a person's mind is focused on something worthy or noble, the fear of death is diminished. You can say a clear sense of purpose or a good intention can make death less of a threat and more of a natural outcome of one's actions. Doth avert the dolours of death. The phrase dolours of death refers to the sorrow or pain associated with dying. Bacon claims that when someone's mind is focused on something good and meaningful, it can help to distract from the pain or sorrow that death may bring, and even avert it altogether, making death seem less fearful. But, above all, believe it. Now he shifts his focus to the sweetest and most peaceful way to face death. He stresses the importance of this belief, indicating that it is central to understanding death. The sweetest canticle is, Nunc dimittis. Now he quotes the Latin phrase, Nunc dimittis, which means, now let me depart, or, now let me die. It is a biblical phrase from the Gospel of Luke, often used in the context of someone who feels they have fulfilled their purpose and are ready to die in peace. When a man hath obtained worthy ends, and expectations, This phrase means that the sweetest moment of death comes when a person has achieved something worthy in life and has seen their expectations fulfilled. When a person has lived a meaningful life, their death is not something to fear but a peaceful release. They can leave this world content, knowing they have lived well. Death hath this also. Now he points out that death has another benefit. It frees a person from the negative aspects of life, that it openeth the gate to good fame, and extinguisheth envy. It means that death has the power to secure a good reputation and to end envy. When a person dies, their legacy is often remembered favorably, and any jealousy or resentment towards them disappears. This suggests that death can bring a sense of final justice, where one's true worth is recognized and envy no longer tarnishes their image. Extinctus amabitur idem, this is a Latin phrase which means that the person who is dead will be loved just the same. It implies that after death, people will remember and continue to admire the individual for who they were, often more fondly than when they were alive. Death preserves the person's reputation and ensures that any negative aspects of their life are forgotten, allowing them to be remembered with affection and respect. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture, but please don't forget like and subscription to my channel. Thank you.